When a pipe bursts in your house, the plumber doesn't stand in the flooded hallway philosophizing about the molecular structure of water.
Right. No, they just
Yeah.
find the leak.
Exactly. They patch the pipe, they dry the floor, just simple cause and effect. But when a massive societal pipe bursts, like when we experience a widespread crisis or some tragic event, suddenly everyone is standing in the water, pointing at a completely different puddle.
Oh, absolutely. Everyone's just, arguing over whose fault the flood is.
Right. And today, we've got a really compelling case study for you.
We do, because in a society, the leak is rarely just one broken pipe that you can, point a wrench at. It's usually an entire invisible plumbing system hiding behind the drywall.
Yeah, but we all crave that comfort of a simple single cause, right? It just gives us an easy target for our frustration.
Exactly. And the source material we are looking at today really gets into the mechanics of that. It's an academic excerpt titled Castro versus Teachers, a Philosophical Analysis.
And it's a document that takes a very specific, highly charged public controversy and uses it as a masterclass in how to decode the hidden mechanisms of our world.
Yeah, it strips away the emotional noise. It just looks at the gears turning underneath it all.
So just to set the stage for you listening, our mission today is to analyze a controversy that unfolded in the Philippines. We're looking at a conflict between a government spokesperson named Claire Castro and various teachers groups.
Mostly ACT, right?
Yeah, ACT, which stands for the Alliance of Concerned Teachers. And this all ignited following a tragic school shooting at Ateneo de Zamboanga.
Right. An incredibly difficult situation.
Very. And in the aftermath, Castro made some public remarks that linked the behavior of some teachers to students' disrespectful behavior. The specific term used in the text is walang modo.
And almost immediately after those remarks hit the press, the teacher groups pushed back hard.
Oh, yeah, they did.
I mean, they interpreted those comments as the government unfairly shifting the blame for this horrific, complex tragedy entirely onto educators.
Which, to be fair, Castro did subsequently clarify her stance. She stated she was merely reminding teachers of their fundamental role in shaping young people, not accusing them of causing the tragedy.
Right, but the damage was kind of already done in the public eye.
Exactly. Now, before we go a single step further, I need to issue a mandatory impartiality note. Because this deep dive involves actual government entities, political figures, and union organizations, we want to be crystal clear with you.
We have to be totally neutral here.
Completely neutral. We are not taking sides. We are not endorsing any specific viewpoints, and we are absolutely not here to act as a judge declaring who is right or wrong in this dispute.
No, not at all. Our sole objective is strictly and impartially applying the sociological and philosophical frameworks provided in our source material to this case study.
We're just using the controversy as a lens, nothing more. So why should you care about this specific debate happening half a world away?
Well, because it introduces a core universal question that you see play out every single day.
Right. Who actually has the power to determine who is accountable for a social problem? We are equipping you with 6 distinct philosophical lenses. They will help you cut through the noise of absolutely any major societal blame game you see.
Whether it's on the news, on social media, or even, in your own community.
Okay, let's unpack this. We have to begin by examining the raw power dynamics of the controversy.
Yeah, the fundamental tension here is really how 2 different groups can look at the exact same public statement and experience 2 entirely different realities.
It honestly reminds me of an optical illusion. You know those classic ambiguous drawings where one person stares at it and clearly sees a rabbit?
Oh, yeah, and the other person looks at the exact same lines and sees a duck.
Exactly. Castro looks at her own statement and sees the duck. To her, it's a simple professional reminder to educators about their role.
But the teachers hear those exact same words and see a rabbit. They see a direct attack on their profession and their dignity.
So to figure out how we get such drastically different experiences of reality, we really need a framework.
And Max Weber's Sociology of Power provides that exact framework. That's our first lens.
Weber was a foundational sociologist, right?
Yeah, he spent his career categorizing different forms of legitimate authority. So in this controversy, we're basically watching a high-speed collision between 2 very specific competing types of authority.
Right, because if I'm looking at Claire Castro, her authority comes from the institution she represents. She has the state behind her.
Exactly. And that is a very different type of power than a teacher holding an educational credential.
So how did Weber define that?
Well, he categorized Castro's position as political authority, specifically legal rational authority. As a government spokesperson, she speaks with the institutional weight, resources, and platform of the state.
And on the flip side,
On the other side, the teachers possess professional authority. Their legitimacy doesn't come from a government mandate. It comes from, specialized expertise, years of training, and a recognized status within the community.
but, I mean, in a heavily structured society, I have to imagine political authority fundamentally outranks professional authority, doesn't it?
How do you mean?
Well, the government theoretically represents the people, right?
Yeah.
They set the curriculum, they pay the salaries in public schools.
Mm-hmm.
Don't they have the inherent right to publicly define what a professional's responsibility is?
That tension is exactly what Weber forces us to look at. When does political authority overstep its bounds in defining professional responsibility?
Okay.
And conversely, when does professional expertise give a group the legitimacy to push back against the state?
Right.
But to really answer your question about who outranks whom in practice, we have to layer in Karl Marx and conflict theory. This is our second lens.
Conflict theory. That's basically the heavyweight champion of power dynamics, isn't it?
It really is.
It argues that society isn't some happy, cohesive, cooperative unit. It's fundamentally composed of different groups competing for limited resources, and those groups have wildly unequal power.
Spot on. So when a social conflict happens under this lens, it is never just a simple misunderstanding between two individuals.
It's a reflection of unequal institutional power.
Exactly. The source material maps out the specific hierarchy in this case study. State authority flows to the government spokesperson.
Okay.
Then you have the teachers on the receiving end, who then organize into collective groups like ACT to consolidate their own power.
Because they have to, right?
Right. And finally, you have the general public observing and judging the entire spectacle.
And the mechanism of that power is just fascinating.
Yeah.
A government spokesperson has completely asymmetrical access to media.
Oh, absolutely. They can call a press conference, and national television networks will broadcast their narrative instantly.
But teachers, individually, have almost zero media power. They have to rely on the sheer numbers of a union just to get a statement printed in the same newspaper.
Which is why this isn't just a squabble over a poor choice of words. It is a high-stakes battle over who gets to define the cause of a social problem.
Because whoever successfully defines the problem controls the fallout.
Exactly. Think about the tragedy of student violence. If you have the power to broadcast the definition of the cause, you get to decide how society views it.
Right. You decide if it's viewed as a failure of individual responsibility or parenting or school discipline.
Or a symptom of social media, or a failure of government policy. Controlling the narrative means controlling exactly where society directs its blame, its anger, and, its demands for accountability.
Here's where it gets really interesting, though. If controlling the narrative is all about power, how is that power actually exercised on a day-to-day basis?
Through language.
Right. They are to blame teachers. They're using press releases and interviews. The friction happens entirely at the level of words.
And that brings us to our third lens, symbolic interactionism.
Okay, break that down for us.
This theory posits that people construct their social reality entirely through symbols, through language, and through their micro-interactions with each other.
So words aren't just words.
Exactly. Under this lens, words are not merely dictionary definitions. They carry massive, accumulated social weight.
And the text specifically zeroes in on the phrase walang modo, meaning disrespectful behavior, and the label of teacher.
Right. The analytical question here isn't whether the words used were factually accurate in a vacuum. The real question is what social meaning is generated when you apply that specific label to that specific group.
Because society has built a really complex symbolic architecture around the word teacher.
Exactly. A teacher is not perceived merely as a data delivery employee. The label carries the weight of an educator, a moral role model, an authority figure, and culturally, a second parent.
Which is wild because Castro actually reinforced that exact symbolic meaning in her clarification later. She explicitly stated that teachers are character builders and second parents.
She did. And symbolic interactionism reveals that meaning isn't dictated solely by what the speaker intends.
It's a two-way street.
Yes.
Yeah.
Meaning is manufactured in the friction between the speaker's intent and the listener's reception based on their identity.
It's like sending a text message to a friend that just says, fine, with a hard period at the end.
Oh, I hate that.
Right. The sender types it thinking, okay, sounds good. We're in agreement. Moving on. That is their intended reality. But the receiver reads, fine, and immediately panics.
They're thinking, oh my gosh, they're furious with me. What did I do wrong?
Exactly. The interaction itself creates an entirely new reality that neither person fully controls.
And that's exactly what happened here. Castro's intended interpretation was, this is a professional reminder of your duties.
But the teacher's interpretation, filtered through their deeply held professional identity and the trauma of the recent shooting, was, we are being scapegoated for a societal failure.
And neither side is simply fabricating their reaction. The meaning is socially constructed right there in that space between them. But, if we only look at the one-on-one friction of a single statement, we miss how the rest of the country ends up taking a side.
Because these isolated interactions don't happen in a vacuum, right?
Exactly. They scale up into macro realities. And this brings us to our fourth lens, the broader theory of social constructionism, developed by sociologists Peter Berger and Thomas Luckmann.
So while symbolic interactionism is looking at the micro level, like the specific words in a single press conference, social constructionism zooms way out.
It does. It looks at how an entire society accepts something as an undeniable truth over time. Reality is built over time through institutional statements, media repetition, and public interpretations.
And the source material lays out 4 distinct competing macro narratives that emerged from this single event, right?
It does. Let's walk through them.
Yep.
Narrative A is the traditional view. Teachers have a fundamental responsibility to shape students' character.
Okay, pretty standard.
The narrative B is the defensive view. The government is unfairly blaming teachers for the tragedy of student violence.
Right, the pushback.
Then, narrative C focuses on behavioral specifics. Certain teachers have genuinely violated professional standards and failed their duties.
And then narrative D.
Narrative D zooms out to the systemic view. The larger problem of violence is systemic and multi-causal, not a failure of individual educators.
So here's my question. How does one of those narratives actually win out over the others? Do they just battle it out in the public sphere until one gets enough likes and retweets to become the accepted truth?
Well, it comes back to institutional amplification.
Ah.
The narrative pushed by the group with the most structural power or the loudest, most consistent platform often becomes dominant.
Which is a huge advantage for the state.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And the danger is that once a narrative achieves dominance, it acts as an invisible filter for everything that happens afterward.
It influences how the public interprets every subsequent event.
Exactly. Like, if narrative B wins out, every subsequent government policy regarding education is instantly viewed suspiciously as an attack on teachers.
And if narrative A dominates, every time a student misbehaves anywhere in the country, the public subconsciously registers it as a teacher's failure.
Which brings up a great point. Because if we get so fixated on this one single interaction or this one dominant narrative about teachers, aren't we kind of ignoring the rest of the world?
Yeah, I mean, the student involved in this tragedy didn't just spawn into existence inside a classroom. They have an entire life outside of those 4 walls.
Right. And this is where we have to view society as a comprehensive ecosystem. The philosophical framework for this, our fifth lens, is structural functionalism.
Okay, structural functionalism.
It views society as a complex, interlocking system of institutions. The family, the school, the government, the economy, the community.
So they all have a job to do.
Exactly. Each institution performs a specific necessary function to keep the entire society stable and operational.
And one of those key functions is socialization, right?
Mm-hmm.
Teaching citizens the rules of the game so society doesn't just collapse into chaos.
Yes. Teaching norms, instilling values, enforcing discipline. And this perspective actually validates the core of Castro's initial argument.
Really? How so?
Because schools absolutely possess a massive socialization function. Even DepEd, the Department of Education, writes explicit ethical standard detailing the professional role of teachers in shaping the moral fabric of the youth.
Right. But a student's behavior is a massive, multivariable equation.
Mm-hmm.
You can't just look at the school variable and ignore the rest of the math.
Functionalism demands that we look at the entire equation. A student's action is the culmination of their family dynamics, their peer group, their formal schooling, their media exposure.
The online culture they consume.
Yes, the community norms they observe, their individual psychology, and even the socioeconomic pressures their family faces.
It's like a major city experiencing a catastrophic week-long power outage, right? The mayor calls a press conference, points to a single broken light switch in one person's living room, and says, "There's a problem. We need to fix that switch."
That's a perfect analogy. Yes, the switch might be broken.
But focusing entirely on that switch completely ignores the failing power plant, the aging electrical grid, the downed wires across the city, and, the lack of maintenance funding.
Exactly. You simply cannot reduce a multi-causal phenomenon down to a single institution. A functionalist analysis screams out a warning. Do not reduce systemic problems to a single point of failure.
Because when we do that, we blind ourselves to the actual structural issues.
And this leads us directly into our sixth and final lens, critical theory.
Now, critical theory is the lens that refuses to accept things at face value.
Right?
It asks highly uncomfortable questions about motives.
It really does. If we connect this to the bigger picture, it moves the discussion completely beyond the surface-level question of whether Claire Castro or the teachers were factually correct about a specific code of conduct.
It's looking deeper.
Right. Critical theory doesn't just ask what is happening. It asks who benefits from what is happening.
It interrogates the power structure itself. Who actually controls the narrative being broadcast to millions of citizens?
And whose voice is being marginalized or silenced in the debate.
And most importantly, what institutional interests are being protected by pointing the finger entirely at teachers?
Consider the implications of that. If the public discourse is solely focused on the failures of educators, it safely reproduces existing power structures.
Oh, wow. Yeah. It protects the government from having to answer questions about educational funding or systemic poverty.
It protects social media companies from having to answer for the algorithms that feed violent content to teenagers.
And it protects parents from having to examine their own home environments.
Blaming the light switch is incredibly beneficial for the power company.
So what does this all mean? I'd push back here, though. If we apply this systemic lens and say everyone is involved, the family, the government, the media, the culture, the economy, doesn't that just dilute accountability to zero?
I see where you're going.
Isn't this philosophical approach just a really fancy academic cop-out? Are we basically throwing our hands up and saying, well, society is a complex web, therefore nobody is actually responsible for this tragedy?
That is the most common critique of sociological thinking, and it's a completely valid concern. However, the source material provides a brilliant practical distinction to solve that exact problem.
Okay, what is it?
It argues that responsibility is not a synonym for blame. They are two fundamentally different concepts.
Okay, how does the text separate responsibility from blame?
Well, recognizing shared responsibility across multiple institutions does not mean everyone is equally responsible for every single incident.
Right.
Nor does it absolve individuals of their specific duties. Yes, a teacher has a professional responsibility to educate and guide. Parents have a fundamental responsibility to nurture and supervise. The government has a macro responsibility for policy and resources.
But we have to move away from the destructive trap of blame and move toward a constructive framework of shared accountability.
Exactly. And the text outlines two distinct approaches a society can take when handling a crisis like this.
Let's hear them.
The first is the blame approach. It starts with a definitive premise. For example, students are violent because teachers failed.
And what is the immediate mechanism of that approach? Defensiveness. Teachers feel attacked and dig in their heels.
Government officials feel challenged and double down on their authority. Parents feel excluded from the conversation entirely.
The only question being asked in the blame approach is, who is guilty?
Which operates basically like a witch hunt. It doesn't solve the structural problem, it just finds a convenient target to absorb the public's anger so everyone else can move on.
Right. Contrast that with the second method from the text, the social scientific inquiry approach.
Instead of asking who is guilty, it asks a fundamentally different question. What factors contributed to this problem?
That forward-looking approach investigates all the angles without needing an immediate villain.
Yes. It looks at the individual psychology. It examines the family environment and supervision structures.
It evaluates the school's discipline programs and the resources available to teachers.
It analyzes peer pressure dynamics. It looks at the digital environment to see what kind of content the youth are consuming. It reviews government policy and community safety nets.
The practical application of that is immense. It shifts the entire societal conversation from a backward-looking, hostile argument over whose fault is this, to a forward-looking collaborative action plan of what must each institution do to prevent this from happening again.
It completely disarms the conflict. And that shift is the ultimate civic lesson embedded in this source material.
It's a huge takeaway.
The text makes a profound observation that we often forget. Democracy is not the absence of conflict.
Right. A healthy democracy doesn't mean everyone magically agrees all the time.
The goal of a democratic society is not total consensus. Democracy is designed to provide mechanisms for managing inevitable conflict without it degrading into outright hostility or violence.
It is a messy, ongoing, frustrating process of hearing different perspectives, examining evidence, questioning power structures, identifying responsibilities, and negotiating solutions.
It's about building a system where accountability is established without destroying the interconnected institutions we all rely on to survive.
We don't want the government spokesperson and the teachers' union to just hold hands and pretend everything is perfect.
No, we want a system where when a tragedy occurs, we don't just sacrifice a scapegoat to appease the public outrage, leaving the root causes completely untouched to cause another tragedy down the line.
Studying the philosophy of social sciences isn't just about memorizing the names of, 19th century thinkers. It is about developing critical citizenship.
It is about recognizing that our immediate emotional interpretation of a news story or a viral video is almost never the full social reality.
We have to actively train ourselves to pause and examine the assumptions, the evidence, and the hidden power dynamics before we rush to conclusions.
Because if we don't, we're just splashing around in the puddles on the floor while the pipes keep bursting behind the walls.
We're fixing the symptoms while the disease spreads.
Exactly.
This brings us to you listening right now. We promised you a cheat code to decode the world, and we want to leave you with a final thought to mull over a way to apply these 6 lenses to something entirely outside of the education system.
Yeah, try putting this into practice.
Think about the massive disruption happening right now with artificial intelligence and automation. When a major corporation lays off 1,000 workers and replaces them with an AI system, watch how the blame game unfolds in the media.
It's a perfect parallel.
Often, you'll hear narratives blaming inevitable technological progress, or you'll hear pundits blaming the workers themselves for failing to upskill and adapt to the modern economy.
Just another version of blaming the teachers.
Exactly. Take a step back and apply critical theory and social constructionism. Ask yourself, who actually controls that narrative? Who benefits from framing massive job losses as a failure of individual workers to adapt?
What institutional power structures, like corporate profit margins or lack of labor protections, are hiding safely in the shadow of that narrative?
The next time you see a massive internet outrage trying to narrow our collective focus onto a single simple scapegoat, look for the invisible plumbing. Look for who is holding the wrench. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. Keep questioning the narrative, and we'll catch you next time.